Hey, what is up guys? Going to be showing a tutorial on how to maximize your DPS in Diablo 3 Reaper of Souls. So, first off, what you actually want to do is you want to make a wizard. No joke, wizard is so far ahead of any of the other classes, it's not even, in my opinion, worth it to actually invest all your time into a class that's simply not going to be as good. You can tell by this, by going onto the forums and hearing about the people that don't play wizard and complain about how overpowered wizard is. So, first off, I'll give you a brief explanation of why wizard has so much insane DPS to the point where it's really not worth it to try other classes if you want to be the best of the best. If you want to just have fun and you have fun playing Bunker or anything, you can definitely go ahead and do that. But seriously, no joke, not trolling, wizard is so far ahead of any of the other classes in the game. So first off, as far as passives go, you have so many passives that actually increase damage. If you've played Monk, you'll understand that they have like 2 passives that increase like damage. Like you have the one where if you move for like 3 seconds, you increase your damage by like 3 seconds after you've moved like 15 yards or something like that. And there's also another passive that allies affected by your mantras make it so you can gain additional damage. But really what it comes down to, you get like 1. I mean, the Tempest, well, I mean, unless you're playing Tempest Rush, you can't actually benefit from the other passive. With Wizard, you have so many passives that actually buff your damage. So you have Glass Cannon, you have Cold-Blooded if you're playing Arcane Orb, which is basically the build that I will be showing off today. And you also have Audacity, which can definitely increase your DPS. You also have Unwavering Will if you want to go ahead and go to the route of a sit-still wizard, which to me isn't as fun, but you can still do a lot of DPS with stuff like Disintegrate. So we're going to go ahead and jump right into Paragon points. Then we're going to go over like paper DPS, we're going to go over skills passives, and also crit proc effects, and basically how to gear up your character as well. So first off, Paragon points. Let's go ahead and go over those. So to maximize DPS, you want intelligence. But one of the most important things actually that goes next to DPS is movement speed. If you don't happen to have the ability to move faster, you won't be able to get to these other areas faster, to kill the mobs faster. Now the reason why I have 25% movement speed is because that's the maximum amount that you can get on a wizard without anything that has some type of proc effect. Like there are these bracers which can increase your movement speed when you break smaller debris and stuff like that. But you want 25% movement speed. That'll keep you alive longer and also let you get to other areas faster. It doesn't technically add to your DPS on chart, obviously, because that's movement speed, but it will let you clear areas faster, which basically means that you'll be increasing your chances to find legendaries because you're going to be clearing things a lot faster. The next thing that we need to go over, the reason why I don't have any I have 25% movement speed on my Paragon points is because my boots actually don't give me any movement speed. I'm going to actually re-roll this to have more Arcane Orb damage because that'll get me actually more effective DPS. I know this won't actually show up on this, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But so on the core, you want to put, the only thing that's going to increase your DPS essentially is going to be intelligence, but you do want 25% movement speed before anything else. So get that and then go ahead and put all your other points into intelligence. Next up, for the offensive abilities. Depending on what your crit hit damage and your what other things that you have that can potentially proc, like for example, with this build you don't really care about cooldown reduction, so you don't have to worry about this. There are other Archon builds and stuff that can really benefit from cooldown reduction, but for the most part, what you actually want to do, unless you're playing something that has some type of proc effect where on critical hit chance you gain some type of an effect, then you probably would want to upgrade your critical hit chance. One example of that would be something like on Storm Armor, you can use something called Shocking Aspect, and it says critical hits have a chance to electrocute nearby enemies. Now this won't actually show up in your paper DPS, and I'm going to mention paper DPS and effective DPS a lot of times in this video. What I mean by paper DPS is this damage right here, which is basically what it shows you over here, and this means literally nothing. If I have anything that increases cold damage like this over here, or my bracers, or anything that increases my Arcane Orb damage, which is the main skill that I actually use, that won't actually affect this damage. So this is paper DPS, it's fake, don't believe it. It can still benefit you from certain things. So it's not completely useless, but for the most part, it is useless if you actually want to find out your effective DPS. To find out your effective DPS, you can go into a boss, and so you can solo him, take his HP and the amount of time it takes you to kill him, and you can find your DPS per second, per minute, whatever you want to actually find out. So that's a much more accurate way to find out your DPS. But like I mentioned before, things can proc on critical hit chance. Some things can proc on attack, like for example, the Hellfire Ring can proc on attack. So from there, you don't actually want, in certain builds actually is what I should say, certain builds you actually would rather go for attack speed. But for the most part, I don't actually build attack speed on my Arcane Orb Wizard because I can't sustain spamming Orb over and over. It's much more effective to get my Orb to one-shot things rather than throwing multiple orbs and just wasting my energy, because essentially energy is not free right now for me because I don't have enough resource cost reduction to the point where it makes it effective to actually boost up my attack speed. So what you want to go for is critical hit damage and critical hit chance. You can actually find out what is more effective by using the paper DPS, because that will show a little bit more accurately, unless of course you have things that proc on critical hit chance, then you might want more critical hit chance. But if your critical hit chance is already at 50% or higher, I recommend you to put everything into critical hit damage, then go critical hit chance, and then you can go into whatever else you want. For the defensive abilities, I personally like life regeneration more than anything. I don't get one-shotted because you have such high intelligence as a wizard once you are geared up to the point where it's totally okay just to put life regeneration, because keeping yourself alive obviously is key in the game. And I already have I'm at 439,000 life, so I think I'm okay on life right now. But I'm gonna go life regeneration, then I'm going to go life, then I'm going to go either resist all or armor. I mean, I have so much resist all to the point where it's kind of irrelevant, because there is a threshold in Diablo. Once you reach a certain amount of either like cooldown reduction, resource cost reduction, there's a threshold at which it's less effective. So if, let's say, I have 50% resource cost reduction, or actually cooldown regeneration, or cooldown, because I know that this is for sure, because I actually tested this all month. If I have a piece of gear that gives me 5% cooldown reduction, and I already have, let's say, 55% cooldown reduction, it'll only give me an additional like 2% instead of the 5% which it should give me. So it reaches a point in which the cooldowns can't reach 100%, I think, is what they were trying to go for. But there might be some other gear that can give you a huge boost to the point where you might be able to actually get that. I don't know. I don't personally have that gear, but I'll let you guys know in the future. But yeah, there is a threshold where it gives you diminishing returns. As far as utility goes, resource cost reduction is going to be what you want to go for, because the more times you can spam orb, the more times you can deal more damage. So the resource cost reduction is really good. You'll see that orb normally costs 30 arcane power, but I have resource cost reduction of 16.3%. So instead of it costing 30, it costs a lot less than that. So that's obviously important if you want to maximize your DPS. So next up, let me go and talk a little bit more about the paper DPS and effective DPS. So for example, there are things that give me cold damage. This will not be affected by this, and I can show you this really quickly by equipping these bracers over here. So you'll see that these bracers have more intelligence and they have the same critical hit chance. Basically, the only thing that's actually telling me that it's increasing DPS is simply because of that extra intelligence. You'll see that it'll say I do more damage over here, but technically I won't actually deal more damage with orb. I might deal more damage with something else because I get more intelligence with like Spectral Blade or something like that. But for the most part, I won't actually be increasing my DPS. It's called paper DPS, and that's essentially fake. Next up, let's go ahead and go over my skills and passives, and then I can go over my gear and tell you what you actually want to do to gear up, essentially. So, first off, for skills, this is basically the standard build for orb. There's a lot of different builds that you can actually play for orb, but for the most part, this is basically cookie cutter. This is not a build that essentially you have to go by, but it's a really good build, and you'll have a lot more fun playing this, I would say, than a Disintegrate build, because if you play Disintegrate, you kind of hold still, and it's really not nearly as fun, for me personally. But if you have fun playing Disintegrate, you can definitely go into Disintegrate yourself. But anyways, for primary, using Spectral Blade, Siphoning Blade, this just gives me extra arcane power, and what you want to do is you want to use this on a group of like scorpions, a group of skeletons. You want to use this on high density areas where you can just hit them once or twice with Spectral Blade and you'll get back to like full arcane power. Next up, I use Power of the Storm with Storm Armor. That basically makes it so Arcane Orb costs less, therefore I can spam it more often, therefore increasing my DPS. Next up, for my first ability, essentially, that's not on the mouse, is going to be Teleport with Wormhole. Wormhole gives you a huge boost in how fast you can actually clear areas, plus it gives you survivability. What you can do is, if one of those icicles is about to explode and freeze you in place, you can consistently cast Wormhole over and over, and you actually can't get hit. You actually cannot take any damage other than perhaps dots while you're actually in the effect of teleporting with the ability of Wormhole active, so you can't take any damage. You can go into Molten and rapidly teleport in the Molten, and you will not take any damage for that 1 second, so it helps out against that. Also, it can get you over some of the Wallers, Jailers. It can break stun, essentially, and some of the other areas. Obviously, if you're frozen, you can't use teleport, which is unfortunate, but hopefully they'll change later on. Next up, we have Familiar with Sparkflint. This just gives you a free boost of 10% damage, and it's basically another version of magic weapon, but this can actually attack for you. What I have right now is set up for Tal Rashas once I finally finish my Tal Rashas, which will hopefully be relatively soon. So you'll see I have Arcane, I have Fire, I obviously have cold damage over here on my Arcane Orb, and then I have lightning damage with the power of the storm. So from there I have all the elements and damage. So if I really wanted to, I could definitely switch up my passes, which we'll talk about why I'm not using a certain passive later on. But for the most part, this gives you so much extra DPS. Again, going back to the idea that Wizard just has the best abilities to just increase their DPS. You get 10% from this, you get an additional 20% from this, you get an additional 15% from Glass Cannon, you basically have 10% extra from Cold Blooded, and if you really wanted to, if you happen to have the Arcane Power Regeneration, you can go ahead and throw on Audacity if you want to. You can go ahead and throw on Unwavering Will if you want to, or Elemental Exposure, which I think is actually much more effective. And I'll talk about that once we get into the passives. But as far as my main skill, I just use Arcane Orb. That's basically used because, first off, Frozen Orb hits way more times than it is supposed to. There's already been multiple blue posts about how Frozen Orb hits more times than it is supposed to. I don't feel like they will actually nerf this simply because Orb is something that they brought back into the game. They wouldn't put something back in, get everyone excited about, have everyone play it, and then nerf it to the point where it's not usable. If they do nerf it, I still think it's very viable. One thing I want to mention, though, it does not hit for the amount of times that it is in the actual animation. So you'll see all these little spikes that come out from that. That does not hit everything. What actually happens with Frozen Orb, there's a set box. I wish I could draw a box, but there's a huge box. It's a huge radius though. It's absolutely ridiculous how many enemies it can hit. And the thing is, it can hit the same enemies multiple times, which is why I love Cold Blooded with this. So basically, there's a huge box in which it hits, and it hits the same target multiple times. This actually does not need to connect at all. The spikes don't need to hit. The explosion shard effects don't actually need to hit. It just has a AoE effect that is irrelevant to the attack animation. So that's pretty relevant. If you are in, like, if there's a whole bunch of enemies, you'll hit all of them. Like, you won't have to worry about, like, the icicles getting essentially blocked by another enemy. But as far as the passives go, I love Glass Cannon because it's just straight up just increases your DPS. Next up, I run Cold Blooded because the thing is, Orb hits multiple times, so the first Orb that hits them, it will chill them. Any cold damage in this game, to my knowledge, unless there's other things that are special, anything that you hit them with cold damage, that will chill them, or it can freeze them on certain skills like Blizzard and stuff like that. And basically, you hit them once, and then they will be chilled, and then the second time it hits them, or the third time, or sometimes the fourth time it hits them, it will actually just deal more damage. So it's basically just free 10% extra damage after the first hit, which basically procs every time anyways. Next up, I run Astral Presence just to have more sustainability for my Arcane Power Regeneration, as well as it boosted up by 20. Next up, this is an energy management skill. This is one of the best ones, Power Hungry. So every time you get healed by a health globe, you can actually gain a free cast of Frozen Orb, which is really what it comes down to. So it's very good in that aspect. Plus, I have other things that help with Power Hungry. Like, I have a slightly synergized build, which means other things help this out a little bit more. So let me go and give you an example of what I mean by that. So this Glass of Life amulet over here makes it so enemies you kill have a 4% additional chance to drop a health globe. Therefore, that has a higher chance for me to actually benefit from Power Hungry. I also have a belt over here, Razor Storp, which makes it so picking up health globe deals a bunch of damage. I don't know how much it actually hits for. I think it's about 5 mil plus-ish on my build, but for the most part, it's just free DPS. It's small DPS, but it definitely hits. It definitely helps. I mean, if I really wanted to boost if I really wanted to boost my DPS up to the point where it gets crazy, which is kind of pointless because it's not as effective because it's more burst DPS rather than effective long-term DPS, I can throw in Audacity, I can throw in Elemental Exposure. But the thing with Elemental Exposure and Audacity is they are conditional and they always won't be able to deal the maximum amount of damage. For example, Elemental Exposure, yes, I do happen to have arcane damage with Spectral Blades, I happen to have fire damage with my Familiar, I happen to have lightning damage with this. Sure, I can get it up to 20%, but it's not nearly as effective as getting 10% consistently consistently each time rapidly, and that's why I don't think elemental exposure works in my build as well as it would in maybe perhaps other builds. Audacity, I have to be close to them, but it definitely is good. I mean, I can get my orb up to 15 million damage per hit, and I mean, it hits multiple times, so it can easily kill groups in one shot. I mean, on Torrent 1, I can kill most stuff in 1 to 2 hits anyway, so if I really wanted to boost it up, yeah, it's optional if you happen to have the arcane regeneration, which I hope to get that point in the future. Next up, let's go ahead and talk about gear. So one thing to note is you can reroll stats in Reaper of Souls, but you can only do it on one stat. So let me go ahead and explain what stats you actually want to reroll. So there are certain things that are much more difficult to reroll than others. For example, getting gloves with critical hit damage at 50% is perfect. It's very hard to roll that 50% because you not only need to have it roll, critical hit damage, but it also has to roll on a high number. If you hold control, you can see the amount of critical hit damage that it can roll. So it can go anywhere from 26% up to 50%. And you can see on critical hit chance, I roll anywhere from 8% to 10%. So the numbers are much smaller. It's basically from 8 to 10 rather than 26 to 50. There's a huge gap. So things that you would rather reroll are going to be things like critical hit chance, not critical hit damage. If it doesn't have intelligence, you can reroll it to have intelligence. That's very easy to roll. Something to get that's much harder is reduce resource cost, because there's a much larger gap, I would say, because not only do you have to roll it, but it goes anywhere from 5 to 8%, but I mean, that could be irrelevant for your build, so this won't apply to everyone, but it definitely is much easier to reroll like intelligence on, armor and get the right number that you want, but shoulders are pretty easy to reroll anyways. I wouldn't say shoulders are hard to reroll. So if you don't have any gear, you're just jumping into the game, you're like, what do I actually do to actually build my character? So what you want to do is you want to do these things called bounties. There's 5 bounties, and once you complete them, you get a free Heraldric Cache. These give you these things over here called Rift Keystone Fragments. Oh, here we go. And once you have 5, you can open up a Nephilim Obelisk. That will allow you to fight a boss at the very end once you complete it. You guys probably have seen it in my previous video. If you haven't, I'll link it down below. And basically, you get a whole bunch of things called blood shards, and you can spend these blood shards on pieces of armor. Let me go ahead and clean up my inventory real quick by salvaging all this stuff, and I can actually show you what you actually want to buy, and I can show you how to select what you want. And right now, I don't really need to read anything. Pretty much for me, since my build is at pretty much maximum potential, other than legendaries, because legendaries will always be better than yellow gear because it can have a higher stat roll on it. Like, for example, actually I don't have any yellow gear, except for my helm. This can only roll maximum of 625 intelligence, that's the max. But if you get a legendary helmet, you can actually roll up to 750, so it's a much larger number. So the best you can roll on a yellow helm, which is a rare, would be 625. For a legendary, the lowest you can get is 626. So it is much more beneficial for you to actually have a legendary helm. Although sometimes you don't get lucky with the legendary helm and it doesn't roll the correct thing that you want, which is understandable. But what you want to do is you want to go ahead and go in the Nephilim Obelisk and activate it, and then go into the Rift, and then you want to get these things called blood shards over here. You want to go ahead and buy stuff with your blood shards, because any of your level 60 gear is going to be basically outdated by any of the level 70 gear. Even your level 60 legendary gear, unless it's amazing. Like for me, I have this Hellfire Ring, which nothing can really be. It's going to be very difficult for me to get an item that rolls damage nearly perfect, well, perfect intelligence, I think, is going to be much higher. I think on legendaries, but the thing is, I have crit hit damage 50%, and I got perfect critical hit chance as well. So that is something that you need to take into consideration as well. I mean, pretty much most of the stuff, and this is a level 60 Hellfire Ring, even though I know it doesn't say, but anyways, it's going to be much more beneficial for you to actually have some of the older gear that rolled like multiple perfects on it, which is really rare, but most of the time you're going to benefit from getting the newer stuff. So for myself right now, I don't really need anything that is yellow, but I can definitely gamble. So Kadala over here will let you gamble, and what you want to gamble for first are going to be shoulders, I would say helmet, I would say, okay, let me actually, it'll be easier to tell me what, it'll be easier for me to tell you what not to gamble for. First off, don't gamble for anything that costs more than 5 in the very beginning. You can get legendaries out of this. I don't believe you can get set pieces from my knowledge right now, but for the most part, the things that you don't want to gamble for. You don't want to gamble for weapon. You do not want to gamble for rings and amulets, so we'll put this over here. You don't want to gamble for these, and you don't want to gamble for I mean, gloves you can get really lucky sometimes, but for the most part, these are what you actually want to gamble for because these are much easier to get the stats that you want. I would say not even the offhand, because the offhand requires a lot more things to roll on it because you actually need it to roll crit hit chance, and you actually want it to also roll the correct one for your whatever skill you want to use. Basically, Arcane Orb is what you definitely want to go for anyways. But yeah, this is what you want, and it's going to be much more difficult to roll because with gloves, you need to have critical hit damage and chance, so I would say build everything else up first. So let me go ahead and go over everything that you actually want to look for in each piece of armor. So let's go ahead and go over that. So we'll start with the helm. With helm, well, pretty much every piece of gear you want to roll intelligence, so we won't mention intelligence. So intelligence on everything is basically what you want. And then you'll want critical hit chance. You can hold control to find out what the maximum chance is. You want critical hit chance, obviously 6 is optimal. Then you also want increased Arcane Orb or Disintegrate or whatever build that you're trying to go for. Now, not every piece of armor can roll Arcane Orb. Some things can only roll primary skills, which are considered the ones that don't cost any arcane power. So, for example, this belt over here, it cannot roll Arcane Orb, it can roll Spectral Blade. But for me, Spectral Blade is just used to regenerate my energy, therefore I'm able to spam Arcane Orb over and over. Shoulders can also roll and get, what does it roll for shoulders? It rolls Hydra Black Hole Explosive. So depending on your build, you might want to just get the stuff in your shoulders and your belt. You might not have to get the helm one. For the helm, you can get the Arcane Orb. For Arcane Orb, you can get it in these 3, I believe, is what you can get it in. Actually, these no. These 3. You can't get it in armor. I wish. I think it's just these 3 parts. If I am wrong, and maybe perhaps a legendary. Yeah, but for the most part, there's just 3 that you can get it from Arcane Orb. But for the helm, you just want critical hit chance 6. You want high intelligence, and then you want whatever skill that you're using. For the shoulders, you just want intelligence, and you want reduced resource cost is what you're looking for. For the amulet, you want damage, you want intelligence, you want critical hit damage, and you want critical hit chance. And again, you can hold controls to find out the maximum value for it. I got really lucky with this one, rolled 97%. Unfortunately, it rolled the lowest as possible for critical hit chance, but again, going back to that point where it doesn't really matter because it's already at 8 to 10 rather than having the critical hit damage at like 50%. Also, another thing that's worthy of mentioning, once you have your critical hit chance at 55% or higher, this basically can be divided in half. So 97% divided by half would be basically how much I'm increasing my damage by, essentially. I know that it's not going to show up on this and stuff like that, but well, it kind of does, but there are other things that can proc, like I mentioned before, where things can trigger on critical hit chance. But for the most part, it's basically divide that in half if you have at least 50% critical hit chance, and that's essentially how much free damage you're actually adding. Next up, we have the armor. Armor, all you want is intelligence, and you want to roll 3 sockets. Intelligence plus 3 sockets. If you can get vitality in anything, it's definitely nice. Like, I wish, where is it? I wish this rolled vitality instead of armor, but, you know, I'm not going to complain about that. I roll 50% critical hit damage. I can't really ask for more than that. But you want it to have 3 sockets. You could actually gamble and get 3 sockets really easy from Kandala. If you don't get the 3 sockets, you'll probably get intelligence, and then you could re-roll something else that you don't need. Maybe it rolled, right now I'm going to probably roll the regeneration life to just life in general, like life percent. So for the most part, you just want 3 sockets, you want intelligence, vitality. It's really easy to actually roll that. For your belt, you just want, well, this is literally like perfect because I don't really care too much about spectral blade damage. So you want intelligence, vitality, resist all, and life. That's going to give you the best ability to survive, or life regeneration if you really want to, but I feel like the Paragon level points will pretty much get you at a decent amount to where you want it. Next up, for bracers, these are actual level 60 bracers, but for yellows, you can only get 15% max. Let me see if I get one of these. Okay, so this one didn't roll. I'll just keep on picking up bracers. Hopefully we'll get a legendary. That'd be really awesome. Okay, one of these will roll. Okay, there we go. So we see lightning skill damage. Lightning skills deal 13% more damage. It can only roll up to 15%, but legendaries, they can roll 15 to 20%. So that's really where legendaries will triumph over older gear, as well as just non-legendary gear. So even if this was perfect, it would only go to 15%. Sure, I will get more intelligence, but I technically will lose out on real DPS, which is the effective DPS. So that'll be much harder for you to actually roll. Like I said earlier, I would recommend starting out with like shoulders, chest armor, helm. Helm can be a little bit difficult sometimes, but for the most part, the most important piece is your chest piece and your pants. Those are the most important ones. You want 2 sockets is maximum in your pants, and 3 sockets is maximum in your chest. So you want maximum sockets. That's the most important, because even if it didn't roll that that intelligence, you can see I'm getting 660 intelligence just from these gems over here, which is crazy. So yeah, you definitely want gems to be in your armor. For gloves, basically with wizard, most classes you want what's called the trifecta, which is attack speed, crit hit chance, and crit hit damage. But with wizard, you don't really need attack speed, which goes back to the point of wizard being super OP, because they just deal so much damage. It's crazy. But you just need crit hit chance and damage. But yeah, that's pretty much what you want in gloves. Obviously, holding control will give you the number that you'll want. So gloves, you want intelligence. Well, pretty much like I said before, everything you want intelligence. You want crit hit damage and crit hit chance. For rings, you want pretty much the same thing as everything else. Well, it's pretty much the same as amulet, although the numbers will be smaller. You want damage, intelligence, crit hit chance, and crit hit damage. And for pants, you just want intelligence, vitality, 2 sockets. And as far as boots, you want, hopefully you can get yours with movement speed, and arcane orb damage, and of course intelligence. And lastly, for the weapon, you want high damage and you want intelligence. It's pretty simple. You want to have a socket. This is like mandatory to have a socket, because if you don't have a socket, you're going to lose a huge amount of DPS. Basically, since I have 55% crit chance, I believe is what I have right now. This basically increases my damage by a little over 65%, almost like 70% extra just free damage. So that is very important. You'll see that if I don't happen to have a socket, which I think I have other things that don't have. So this over here technically has critical hit damage increased by 31%, but this over here, it technically has more damage. You can see that my weapon over here does 2,208 damage, but this one does 2,318 damage, but I still get more damage from this weapon over here, even though this rolled 10% extra damage. Because that critical hit damage increased, I'm getting way more damage out of this, so it's going to be much more effective to use the axe that I'm using right now. Also, with Frozen Orb, you'd rather have a weapon that is technically slower, because that will actually improve your DPS. Because throwing a Frozen Orb multiple times is not going to actually increase your DPS. What's going to increase your DPS is by having a slower weapon, actually. I know technically you can get more DPS, that it is technically still effective, because you can attack more times, therefore you can, you know, throw out more orbs, use all your energy, use Spectral Blade, attack more times more faster, and then gain more arcane power to throw out more orbs. So, I mean, doing that would be very difficult to factor in, because I swear sometimes this doesn't work. There's also different ways to trigger arcane power generation that have a chance, because I swear, this says critical hits grant 3 arcane power, but that is not 100%. It does not work nearly as well as it used to before patch 2.0, because I used to have the old Chantotas. I probably still have this because I refuse to get rid of it, where critical hits grant 10 arcane power. I used to have this on, and even if I would crit, it did not register properly. I'm pretty sure what happens with Orb is, even though it hits multiple targets, the way it works is not true. Like, the critical hits granting arcane power, it has to be a chance that it grants that arcane power. It's not true, so don't believe what you hear. Otherwise, I mean, I'd have 30 arcane power on hit, which I can show you really quickly. That is definitely not what happens. So now I'll have, let me go ahead and throw on these old Palroshes. You'll see that my arcane power on crit right now is going to be 29. And you can see that, okay, let me arcane regenerate. Let's go ahead and go to anywhere. And you'll see I will not be able to be at full energy forever, because I crit 55% of the time, and it's going to cost me, what was it, like 97, I think it was? So, you'll see that on single targets, it won't work. On the group targets, obviously I'll be okay on it, but on single targets, if I can get like a, well, this is Torment 1, so pretty much everything will die too fast. I don't know if this was a good test, but it really doesn't proc the way it's supposed to. Like I said before, it has to have some type of chance or some type of weird box or something. Lowered my DPS so much. Hopefully this will throw out like a boss. This is just slay all enemies, which is going to be super easy. it's going to be too difficult to show you guys, but I mean, you guys can try it out yourself. Actually, you guys can't try it out yourself because stuff from 2.0 won't actually roll 10%. It won't grant you 10 arcane power. Even though this is like, I almost wish I could run this again, but honestly, it doesn't work properly, which makes me very sad. Like, I really wish it did, but this is going to give me way more DPS. I was hitting for, what, like 2 mil, I think was the number? And, like, with this, I can hit for 12. With my actual gear, I'll hit for, like, 12 mil. I can find my old gear. And I think the last thing was, like, a helm. Or is it? Okay, there we go. I'm back to my DPS. Alright, but anyways, I think we pretty much covered everything. We went over the Paragon points, the paper DPS, the skills, the passives, the items, the crit proc effects, and you can only re-roll certain things once, which I talked about. It's much easier to roll critical hit chance rather than rolling critical hit damage, so keep that in mind as well. And I think this pretty much covers everything, but if you guys have any more questions about the build of Wizard or anything else, hey, definitely let me know. But pretty much for the most part, I know I just pretty much talked about how Wizard is like the best and how Wizard's DPS is crazy, and honestly guys, is because you have too much abilities to actually increase your DPS. Hopefully this won't get nerfed in the future, but I still think, oh, one thing I mentioned, the reason why Wizard has the best ability to survive also is, first off, if you played a melee character, one important thing is your life on hit, or essentially your life gain when spirit is spent or something like that, or life gain when fury is spent. One really important thing is that with those classes, once you get stunned or you get hit or you get frozen, you won't be able to hit them, you won't be able to spend your points, your energy, and you'll actually lose because, or you'll die because you can't actually keep up. Like, your enemies are going to be hitting you and you can't hit them back. And that's one problem that you'll have, and obviously sitting back as a ranged character, you won't have that problem. Another reason why Wizard makes itself so much better for everything is because it's passive that's built into the class, which is that that intelligence gives you free resistance. So now that I have 8,000 intelligence, I increase all my resistances by 810, which is absolutely crazy. Dexterity is completely useless. Like, it is the worst. I can't believe that they haven't buffed the Demon Hunter, like, for survivability. Like, the Demon Hunter has the ability to dodge, essentially, but even at, like, I don't know, 8,000 Dexterity, you'd maybe get, like, maybe 20-ish, 20, maybe 30% dodge. I don't know the exact number. But with Monk, you can get it about to almost 50%, which is actually reasonable because you can use that mantra. But the problem is, even dodging 50%, that just makes, so when you take damage, you're going to get one-shotted. And sometimes when you're playing, I'm sure you'll notice, like, you'll just get one-shotted and you're like, okay, that was dumb. And, like, you'll be upset about it, whether you're playing a character that really has high ability to survive. Sometimes you'll just get one-shotted. I don't know what causes that, but we're not playing in hardcore, so it's kind of irrelevant. But strength increases your armor, but by far the most relevant and important one is getting all resistances up, because all resistance actually includes physical resistance anyways. And armor, I really don't know exactly how it works in this game, but all I know, and from what I've read on a lot of the forums, people complaining about how OP Wizard is, it comes down to this. And honestly, I can take a lot more hits on my Wizard than I could on my Demon Hunter that also had, I think my Demon Hunter had half the toughness, and it had about the same type of gear. Like, it was all 70 gear, pretty much all legendaries, excluding, like, I think I have a Stone of Jordan on that for, like, that extra discipline. But for the most part, it's going to be so much better to have a Wizard, because that toughness it's like free extra toughness that is absolutely crazy. And if you don't happen to have your gear as good as mine, hey, don't worry, you can work your way up. You can put, instead of glass cannon, you can definitely put on blur. I mean, look how much extra toughness I get from that. I go from 6 million to, well, let's see, what's my toughness when I throw in this, to 4 million. So there's a huge gap in the amount of toughness that you get, and from, like, the passive and stuff like that. And you can definitely go for more survivability. One thing to mention, I see a lot of other players that use unstable anomaly, which makes it so if you die, you basically don't die. And they run this instead of blur, and I'm like, why would you even? Like, blur is going to be so much better, because blur will work on every time time you get hit, so you will not actually die. I know this technically hits everything back, and it works under like frozen basically, because you get unfrozen, you knock everything back. So it technically has a little bit of other utility, but for the most part you get much more benefits out of Blur. But anyways, hope this helps you guys out, and like I said, I'm pretty sure I covered everything, but if there's anything that you felt like I forgot, hey, definitely let me know in the comment section and I'll make a future video on it. But anyways, thanks for watching guys, HD Gaming signing out.